Hello, my name is Mikhail. I'm the founder of Idea Space Travel, Ireland's first space tourism travel agency. This is episode 4, season 2 of the High Altitude Adventures podcast. In this episode, we're talking to my guest Samuel Coniglio, who was also my guest in the previous episode. Samuel is a futurist, an inventor, photographer, technical writer, and private space industry advocate. In this episode, we'll talk about space tourism, how it all started and how it went on, and most importantly about the book he wrote, Creature Comforts in Space. Sleep in space, food, showers, toilets. All these topics are covered in this book, and we'll discuss them with Sam in this episode. After this history lesson, where Delta Clipper takes the major part, brief plug on space tourism.
Yes.
Because every time I thought about space tourism, in my own pre-space tourism times, I thought about you first. Because you were my kind of Wikipedia entry for space tourism. It's Samuel Coniglio. So talk to him. So, your ideas, your thoughts, space tourism, brief history, maybe your involvement, your ideas in general, before we even touch the big elephant in the room.
Yes. So, 1996. Okay, I just left McDonnell Douglas out of frustration. I was just involved with the DCX project. I discovered that there's this whole group of private space companies or private space organizations that are trying to get relevance. Something called the X Prize was founded to build the first reusable rocket ship. So all of these were inspirations from the DCX project. Now in 1996, all these startups are coming out of the woodwork trying to make things happen. And this weird concept of space tourism started popping up. Another thing that happened in 1996, two things happened. Tohiro Akiyama from a Japanese media company flew with the Russians as a reporter to space. And Helen Sharman, a British chemist, citizen, won a contest. The contest in the UK, where they were going to put the first British person in space, and Helen won the contest. The contest organizers kind of ran out of money because they were poorly organized, but the British government fit the bill, and she was trained and flew with the Russians. It was a good public relations measure with the British and the Russians, and Helen Sharman flew into space.
Still not called as a space tourist because it was kind of a gray area.
It was a gray area. So, space tourism, what the heck is that? The idea of private individuals flying up to space to take pictures, wear loud Hawaiian shirts like I'm doing, seemed unconceivable, just impossible. No way. Why on earth? You know, space travel is just for the superhero astronauts and cosmonauts who have 5 PhDs and are ex-military and can handle the stress and the strain, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yes, that's great for the early days of space travel. But if you're talking about settlements on Mars or the moon or even just giant orbital space stations, sooner or later you have to let the rest of us in, right? Sooner or later you're going to have to let the regular mom and pop humans show up, maybe the kids, come to the space station and do things, whether they're tourists, whether they're factory workers, whether they're maintenance people, whatever. Not everybody has to have all those PhDs, right? It's nice to have that training, though, to learn how to survive, because there's a lot of factors involved with survival that needs to be taken care of. But the idea is we need more people to go up into space, and to do that we have to acknowledge that we need more people to go into space, which means we now need to design our spaceships and our space stations to be more comfortable for the rest of us. Why do I have to know every wire and cable and connection on a circuit board on a panel on a spaceship just in case I have to repair it? Why can't it be just reliable enough to just work? But when it comes to space, we haven't really improved the technology of just living. You know, what kind of food do you eat? How do you go to the bathroom? How do you take a shower? How do you grow food? Just basic fundamentals. And so in 1996 and on, there was this big burst of interest in the idea of tourism and business in space and people wanting to do something fun and interesting and different besides just simply science. That's it. So there was actually a NASA space tourism study. It was a battle to get it approved by NASA and a battle to get it released. I was there in Los Angeles at the Space Frontier Foundation conference when Dan Golden just laughed off the whole concept of space tourism. Just laughed. And I was there when that happened, and it was embarrassing. It took many, many years to get this concept taken seriously. So those private space startup companies were just trying to push the idea of business in space. Business. Some type of business entity in space with privately owned, privately operated spacecraft. There was none of that. It was all government operated, government run, maybe contractors doing hard work, but it was all government operated, government run. That's how it worked until 2001, when a guy named Dennis Tito flew with the Russians. Dennis Tito was one of the first official space tourists. He first went to NASA years ago to say, hey, I want to fly in space. I'm a millionaire or multimillionaire. Here, I'll give you money. He said, no way. You got to be a test pilot. You've got to have all these PhDs. You got to go through the training. We got to go through approval and all that. So he was kind of stuck. I'm involved with a group called the Space Tourism Society, which has been doing research on experiences on the ground and in the air and in space related to space tourism and space travel. And we talk about this thing called the space experience economy, because there's more to this than just tourism. There's a support system, the people who's organizing it, and designers of the ships, and all other factors that most people don't even know about or talk about. So Dennis Tito shows up at a space tourism conference event back in 1999. The speaker at the time was a guy by the name of Rick Tumlinson. Rick Tumlinson was a co-founder of a company called Mir Corp. Mir Corp had some very interesting connections with the Russians to negotiate with them to turn the Mir space station from a government facility into a commercial space facility. They had one successful flight to fly cosmonauts to the Space Station Mir to do some repairs and maintenance and get it ready for commercial use. So that happened. Great. Mir Corp was trying to get customers and enthusiasm to fly payloads into space, actual business payloads. So basically, it could be science or it could be other projects that are privately funded, privately operated. Mir Corp would facilitate getting them up to the Mir space station. And they also said out of hand, oh yeah, and tourists too. Just slide of hands, like, yeah, sure, why not? And so Rick Tomlinson was there making a presentation at a Space Tourism Conference back in 1999. This guy was sitting in the back row named Dennis Tito. None of us knew who he was. He was just sitting
after being rejected by NASA.
Rejected by NASA, and all that. And so he was very curious, and so John Spencer and I, John Spencer is the founder of the Space Tourism Society, I'm the vice president, and we introduced him to Rick Tomlinson. They had a lovely chat together. One thing led to another. They signed a deal, and Dennis Tito spent, I think, $10 million with them and the Russians. And Dennis Tito signed a deal with Roscosmos to fly on the Russian not Progress.
It was Soyuz, yeah.
Soyuz,
normal
sorry.
Soyuz.
So much stuff in my head trying to keep track of it, but yes, flew on a Soyuz.
Because you're in Ireland in relaxed mode now.
In theory, I'm in vacation right now. In theory, my family is here. We're just playing tourist. I just happen to be in the neighborhood, so I wear my American clothing.
I stole Samuel from his family. It won't last long, so I'll release him back into Irish. Nice weather, actually. Out of nowhere, we have perfect sunshine now.
I brought my California sunshine to Ireland, so you guys can enjoy the weather for a while. As long as I'm wearing this, we're gonna have good weather.
Okay, back to Tito.
Yes, so Dennis Tito, he works through Mir Corp to sign this deal with Roscosmos to fly up to the Russian side of the International Space Station. Of course, the International Space Station is international. That means you have the European Space Agency and NASA involved. Once they got wind that this guy was going to fly, they said, no way. So in late 2000, early 2001, Dennis went through the flight training with the Russians in Russia, became good friends with the cosmonauts, and he was getting ready. He was learning how the Soviets do what they do. Sorry, Russians did what they did for flying on the Soyuz and on the Russian side of the space station. NASA said, no way. He is not a certified astronaut. He's not a test pilot. He doesn't have all these qualifications. And of course, ESA is just going to follow along with whatever NASA says anyway. It's like, no, can't do this. It came to a head in early 2001 when Dennis Tito and his two cosmonaut partners flew to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. They got to the security gate at the Johnson Space Center. And the security guard looked at the badges for the cosmonauts. They let them in. They looked at Dennis Tito and said, "You're not allowed in." So the Russian cosmonauts were allowed onto a NASA facility, but the American businessman was not. This caused an international incident. The cosmonauts said, well, if he's not going, we're not going. And they walked back out with Dennis. Newspaper reporters discovered this, and they heard about this on the news. It became a big deal in the news of, oh my goodness, this businessman is trying to fly into space. The cosmonauts refused to go to the Johnson Space Center for their space shuttle space station training because their partner, this American, is not being allowed to go with them. It was a big controversy, and so there was a lot of negotiations. And what happened was the cosmonauts did finally go back in the Johnson Space Center to finish their training. Dennis was not allowed in. Period. End of discussion.
So the scandal ended with nothing. So
not completely. It did begin a discussion between the various space agencies around the world about what defines a space tourist. Should we allow private citizens in? There was Roscosmos stood by their man. He said, this Dennis Tito paid us money. We have this contract. He is going to fly into space.
But just to roll it back a little bit, Helen Sharman and that Japanese
Tohiro Akiyama, yes.
journalist, they flew to Mir.
Yes.
But they were also not professionals.
Correct.
Limited training, so Russians trusted them to go to Mir and survive there and come back. So the whole hoopla here, the issue was the extension to the American segment.
Yes.
Because it was an international project, fair play, all sides have to agree. If it was just the Russian station, the Russian segment only, then Tito would have flown no problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the whole controversy comes down to the Americans. This is the perception issue. This is the story issue of what is an astronaut, what is a space tourist. Why should we allow any old person to go fly up into space? Why, everyone has to be this special Superman or Superwoman. They have these special qualifications, and if you're not that, you're not allowed. And that's where the controversy comes in with space tourism. Is that this guy, he's a businessman. He just has a lot of money, and he went through the training for the Russians, worked out fine physically. But there was this mindset on the American side that no, it has to be done this way, and that's it. So this event with Dennis Tito broke a lot of doors, broke a lot of barriers, or at least made the world aware that these barriers existed. I call them taboos. We don't talk about sex in space. We don't talk about drinking booze in space. We don't talk about space tourists. And I've been to a number of places where if I even mentioned the phrase space tourism, the other person would run away, because there's still parts of NASA that would not acknowledge the existence of space tourists or space tourism. It's gotten better now, but during that time frame, the 1990s, no.
Okay, tell me the end of the story. No, I'm really...
Wrapping it up.
Yeah,
Wrapping it up.
For the Dennis Tito.
Oh, there's so much...
I know how it ended, but I don't know the last bit.
So, it's complicated. So what happened was, Mir Corp, the company that got him started, went out of business. They couldn't get enough customers. They couldn't sustain their work. And also, the Russians decided to down the space station Mir, because there's this new thing up in orbit called the International Space Station. And because Russia was broke at the time, they couldn't maintain the Mir space station and the Russian modules up there.
But Dennis Tito was planned to go to International Space Station.
Planned to go to Mir initially.
Mir initially?
Yes.
And he couldn't go because Mir was...
The Mir was down.
Okay.
So it's like, but the Russians said, well, we still have a contract with you. Maybe you go fly on the space station instead, the International Space Station. And maybe you just fly on the Russian side of the International Space Station, since that's all we're allowed to show you. So, April 28th, 2001, Dennis Tito flew on a Soyuz rocket, or Vostok rocket, on the Soyuz spacecraft with his partners to the International Space Station. Traditions have it that whenever visitors come to the International Space Station, you give everyone a big hug and all that type of stuff. They land, that the module docks to the International Space Station. The cosmonauts come out first. They give them big hugs, all that stuff. Dennis shows up, and the astronaut says, "Hi, welcome. I'm sorry, I can't give you a hug."
No way.
He was told by his superiors not to give Dennis a hug, or even basically acknowledge his existence. So he came in, and he basically spent most of his time on the Russian modules, not the American modules of the space station. There was a fear by NASA because the space station was still being assembled, still being built. It was more of a factory, it's more of a construction site, that maybe Dennis will bump into something or break something. And the reality is, anybody can bump into something. There's wires and cables and stuff all over the place.
Well, but to be fair, a professionally trained cosmonaut or astronaut is less likely to bump into something.
Yes, exactly. But, that's why you do the training.
Yeah.
He went through the training with the Russian side, who knew where the wires and cables and systems were on the Russian side, but they wouldn't let him do the training on the American side.
Okay.
So he ended up on the Russian side. I mean,
well, to be fair, I'm more on the Americans' side of this whole problem. I would agree that it's a complicated, sophisticated piece of equipment flying into space, a multinational project where all sides have responsibility to each other, and it is a bit reckless to invite random people with a minimum training to that place. And I agree, there was a lot of glass ceilings and doors and barriers which had to be broken.
Exactly.
Luckily it happened, all right, it worked well, sign of relief. It could have ended better.
It worked up there. I was there at Dennis Tito's house years later, and he told us some stories. And one of the stories was the U.S. toilets stopped working. They broke during that flight. And so the U.S. toilets stopped working. They had to use the Russian toilets. But the American astronauts were not trained on using the Russian toilets.
Okay, but I would assume they would be pretty similar in design, because
Maybe.
I saw both designs. They looked
Dennis
about
said
the
he
same.
had to train the astronauts, because he was trained on the Russian side, how to use the Russian toilets. So a little piece of trivia there. So yes, Dennis, yes, he was a tourist, and yes, he made he was just there observing, and he got to play music, and he got to hang out, and all that. But there's no other place to go. There's only one place in space for anyone to go at that time, and that was the International Space Station. Period. That's it. So I have these friends involved in private space industry that are trying to build private space stations. There was a guy named Robert Bigelow who started a little company called Bigelow Aerospace, and from 2000 to 2020, he had a company called Bigelow Aerospace, and he had these inflatable modules that he flew. He flew two of them in 2005 and 2007, I think, to orbit, and they worked fine. They were inflatable habitats. They were great. Only problem was there was no way to get there. There was no transportation system available between 2000 and 2020 to go to these habitats, to go to these private space stations. There was nothing there until, of course, now where we have SpaceX. It's a timing thing. It wasn't until really 2021 that we finally have enough private spaceships that can fly people to other destinations. That's why you have all the stuff. God, there were so many things that happened in 2021. Just a miracle of over a dozen people flying.
6 months of 2021.
6 months
condensed into this short period.
There was a pandemic, I believe, during that time.
Yes.
And everybody was supposed to be stuck at home so they wouldn't get a disease, right?
Instead, they all went to space.
They all went into space, which is pretty isolating, I guess. But yeah, you have people flying on Virgin Galactic, you have people flying on Blue Origin
3
vehicles.
flights on Blue Origin, 1 Virgin Galactic, SpaceX Inspiration 4, and 2 commercial Russian flights. One with Isako Miyazawa and his assistant, and another is with a film crew.
With a film crew.
To film the challenge movie.
Exactly. So space tourism really was born in 2001 when Dennis Tito did his first flight. And from 2001 to 2009, there were maybe about a half dozen people, rich people, who flew on their own dime.
One person
with
flew
the
twice.
Russians. Yeah, Simone. Do you know what Simone is famous for?
I know he's an IT Microsoft engineer.
I think he invented Microsoft Word.
Oh.
I think he invented Word and Excel. Okay, so he's got money. Charles Simone's got money. So fast forward to 2022 or 3, Dennis Tito and his current wife are excited about the idea of flying to the moon, because now SpaceX has these opportunities with Starship. SpaceX is trying to get funding. They have funding for the Starship development, and they're building rockets. They're testing rockets continuously. And they have had proposals with another Japanese industrialist, and of course Dennis Tito.
Dear Moon unfortunately cancelled.
Well, yes, Dear Moon canceled, but that's another story. Get into that later. But Dennis Tito is still interested in flying around the moon.
And Jared Isaacman also.
And Jared Isaacman is working very closely with SpaceX to do a new mission as well. Lots of exciting new concepts coming in the private space industry field. Everything I'm talking about is private space industry. It's not government related. It is not NASA. Everything I'm talking about is a new alternative to space travel as we know it today.
Now, let's notice the elephant in the room. I heard you wrote a book.
Yeah, I wrote a book.
All right, show me the book.
Ta-da! Creature Comforts in Space.
All right, let me show it from my angle. It feels really good. It feels really professional, nice.
The advantage of being a technical writer is that I know how to format and edit and edit and edit. But even though I am an editor, you should always have other people edit your work. And the hardest part about writing is allowing other people to critique your writing.
It's like a baby.
It's like, don't miss my baby. No.
So the name of the book, Creature Comforts in Space.
So for many years, I was doing a series of presentations at space conferences on designing for space tourism. Designing various aspects of living, working, and playing in space to make life more comfortable for you and me. During the pandemic, you got to reevaluate your life a bit, and when 2021 happened and all these people started flying, I was like, okay, now it's time for a book. I wanted to write this book 20 years ago, but the timing wasn't right. And so I felt that in 2021, when we finally actually have private spaceships and private individuals flying in mass, not just onesie-twosies, but in mass, I was like, okay, now the time is here. So, what is a creature comfort? That's hard to explain.
We are all creatures, right?
Well, usually we are, And we like to have something that we enjoy. So, for example, I enjoy a cup of tea in the morning.
I enjoy this big fluffy pillow.
And there you go. Some people like to wear very soft, comfortable clothes. Some people need a good pint of beer because we're in Ireland, and so have a pint of Guinness.
You tried that yesterday, right?
I went to the Guinness warehouse and had my pint of beer and my other experience too. That was very interesting, a lot of fun. But everything from fluffy towels to cookies to air conditioning to just looking at plants or growing plants to there's 100 other things. There's no one thing that's a creature comfort. It's many things. You and I all we have our own differences and personal preferences for how we want to live our lives, how we enjoy our lives, what makes us happy. Now, when you're traveling abroad, you can't carry everything with you. So what are the little things you take with you on your flight?
I take my loudspeaker
Okay.
with nice quality sound because it kind of makes my life comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you have any food preferences, certain things you like?
Well, I don't carry it with me, but I'm seeking it out. Yes, I'm seeking Starbucks. Sorry for the shameless plug. I lived in Seattle for quite a while.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
And Caesar salad.
Caesar salad.
That's my comfort thing. That's where I usually go. So, yeah.
There you go. Excellent. So these.
Oh wait, another thing. I always carry my own towel with me.
Yes.
Because we have to, right?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes. Always bring your towel. Very important. I actually carry a small towel with me just in case. So this book is a culmination of my life experiences in the space world and in my other worlds. Because I have a lot of experience with camping now, and I go to this thing called Burning Man, which is this desert festival you may or may not have heard of. It's kind of a big thing now. And survival desert camping is kind of an interesting thing. Or survival camping of any kind is very interesting, because if you've never like gone hiking in the forest by yourself and you had to bring all your gear with you, all your food, all your water, all your supplies, it's different. I mean, taking a day hike is one thing, but when you're actually out there for days or weeks or months, it's another thing. That's where you have to do a lot of planning and preparation. So I did lots of research about things like Ernest Shackleton's expedition to Antarctica, for example, or the crash of the Titanic, or just other folks who are living in extreme places like Antarctica. How did they survive? Military people, when they go through their training, they usually do survival training exercises. And then Burning Man? So what makes Burning Man special is that it is survival camping for fun. That sounds really strange, but I have to bring all my supplies, all my food, all my water, all my gear for living for a week in the desert. And we're talking, it's 100 degrees, 110, actually 110 degrees, what's that in Celsius?
30 plus.
30 plus degrees Celsius. So very hot temperature, very dusty, like serious dust. We're not talking sandstorms. We're talking fine, like talcum powder dust. Gets into everything. It's hard to breathe sometimes. It's flat, it's hot, and then you have just all the basics to figure out for survival. Where are you going to pee? Where are you going to take care of your garbage? What are you going to do with all these other things? Because the idea of Burning Man is that you leave no trace, you don't make a mess. It's not like other festivals where it's like, yeah, I just throw all my garbage on the ground and walk away.
So after everyone packs and leaves, it's still clean, nice desert.
The clean, nice desert. The goal is to make it just like when you got there, perfectly clean. So there's this thing called the 10 Principles of Burning Man, where leave no trace is one of those principles, where you appear, the desert. So for 1 week out of the year, almost 80,000 people show up on a dry lake bed in Nevada. It becomes an art city. Fantastic sculptures, huge, ginormous sculptures appear, some of which they burn to the ground at the end of the week. Giant vehicles shaped like animals and other things, spaceships, whatever, are driving around. You have these tent structures that are geodesic dome-shaped, or other things up there. You have folks who are just trying to, they build these unique shade structures to keep going. And then they have the party. And what's really fun about this is that, it's like you're partying. My joke is that I call Burning Man Las Vegas on Mars, because that's what it really is. You have this wild party, but you're in this really scary place, this really harsh, nasty place. There are no stores, there are no supermarkets, there are no restaurants, there's no Starbucks, except what you bring with you. And some people bring their own version of Starbucks there. Some people will bring their own version of a bar with them. They'll bring their own version of whatever to give. And so another of the 10 principles is a gifting economy. You don't buy anything. There's no currency there. You don't pay for anything. You give, and you share, and you collaborate, and the part of the ethos of Burning Man is working together to build a greater whole. The city was built by volunteers. Every little part of the structure, the building, the art pieces, the entertainment was brought over by individuals with ideas, and they worked together as a team to bring these giant art pieces up, or to build this little community center, or this restaurant in the middle of nowhere type of thing. So I took a lot of those ideas, how to take survival and make it fun, put into this book about space travel. So there's analogies and metaphors in this book about not just, we keep thinking about space travel, but also think about human experience. What we've done here on Earth, how people live at super high altitudes, how people live in underwater space bases, how people live in Antarctica. We've done it here. We know how to live in extreme environments here. Can we learn from it? Can we adapt to the space? NASA does survival training for astronauts in extreme environments already. But how about you and me, us regular folks? If we're not going through the NASA training and we're not qualified astronauts, we can still have similar experiences. There are some people who still pay lots of money to go up to Mount Everest. There are ways that we can learn how to push our comfort zone, expand beyond what we're used to. I have many friends who can't escape from their comfort zone of just my little niche of living that I can only go to this Starbucks, this one Starbucks, and I can only eat this type of food, and I can only live this type of life. Those people will never go to space. They will just be in a little tiny world. But for folks like you and me who are willing to take chances, willing to expand beyond what we know, to learn new things, to find ways to adapt, that's how we get into space. We find people who can learn to adapt to this new environment and maybe bring a little bit of home with you, or adapt something from home to this new environment. And that's what this book is about. So I talk about food, of course, food and drink, how to adapt cooking and cleaning in space, how to create maybe a new kitchen, a proper galley for cooking food and things in space. They call them galleys on ships, on board ships typically. But basically creating a new way of cooking food, like a stove or an oven type of situation. There's even an advanced concept I talk about where you actually are growing your own meats and vegetables from the cells, proteins themselves, and actually you can grow just the pure meat without having a cow there, and actually have a hamburger. Just
a good steak is my comfort item. So
there you go. I knew it was going to come out. Yeah. So other things. So can we have something that resembles a good steak there, or create something like it? Would it be enjoyable? I don't know. But the idea is variety. That's just one example. And like I say, things break. Machines break. So maybe that vat stopped working. Okay, can I simply make a sandwich? So you got to have that option to be able to create your own food by hand, which is what they do on the space station now, or eventually move up to something more advanced, like a Star Trek style food replicator. I talk about that in the book. Our goal is eventually to get to that level where you can talk to a machine and it creates the food for you. There you go.
A 3D printer for food.
3D printing for food. That exists today. It's still prototypes, but it does exist. How can we get there? It's nice to have role models, so I use that as one of the role models for getting to the next level. Drinking in space, of course, talking about how you can, have not just water or tea, but maybe mixed drinks and cocktails and booze in space and all that type of stuff. There's been no research about what happens to the effects of alcohol to your brain in that environment. I have a feeling you don't need to drink that much because everything goes straight to the head very quickly anyways, because your blood is all flowing up to your head anyways. So I talk about cooking, I talk about cleaning. How do you do the dishes? Can we reuse things? Currently on the International Space Station, there's a lot of one-use plastics. One-use plastic containers for the different foods and different drinks. You consume it, they put it in a bag, eventually it goes onto a Progress shuttle which burns up in the atmosphere. We waste a lot of stuff up there.
But I understand it's not because they're evil people, but because it's not practical to clean.
Exactly. Practicalities. How do we make living in space more practical and simpler instead of having to prepackage all these items, use it once, throw it away? Can we reuse those items? How do you sterilize them? How do you clean them? Can they be reused again? Can we create containers and packaging that can be reused properly for storing the next generation of food? And where do you get this food from? Does it always have to be brought up from from Earth, or can we build space farms?
So in your book, you're talking about technical sides of each of those topics, like moral, psychological.
I go beyond the technical.
Not just technical. So
not just technical.
Than that.
I have 222 footnotes, 20-page bibliography in here to back up everything I'm saying. So I basically tell people that I read the boring scientific journals so you don't have to. And my job is to summarize that and grab the key points of the story, of the reports, and put it in here and package it in a way that would be understandable to the general public.
So in your book you talk about food in space, alcohol in space.
I talk about showers. I talk about toilets. I have a long diatribe about toilets because how terrible they are right now, technically. One of my friends is a private space astronaut who told me some very interesting stories about how the toilets worked or not worked up there. Remember, everything floats. So when you're doing number one, that's one thing. But when you're doing number two, it floats too. So how do you manage that? So I have ideas in here about how to upgrade the toilet system to make it better, based upon the reports, what NASA's done, and the reports from the astronauts and the cosmonauts, how they had to deal with this situation.
Sleeping comfort in space?
Sleeping comfort in space, where I talk about new types of sleeping bags and also creating family quarters. So you can have mom and dad and the kids in one room, and how to improve the noise issues. Because right now, being on the International Space Station is like being in a room with a giant vacuum cleaner. It's a very noisy place. So we got to figure out how to do some more noise reduction. And also, air circulation is a big issue. If you are strapped to a sleeping bag, because that's what you do, strap your sleeping bag to the wall, and you don't have airflow, what happens is that
You'll suffocate.
You're going to suffocate because you're exhaling carbon dioxide, and it sits there in front of you. One of the key elements I talk about in this book is fluid dynamics in space. There's this thing called cohesion, and especially with water, and actually any fluid really, the molecules like to stick to each other, and they want to collect together, and they also like to stick to other things. And so everything from oil to water to other fluids, alcohol, they like to tend to stick to each other. Some have stronger cohesive forces, some have lesser. Water is pretty strong. So on Earth, you can, drop some water on a table and it may just split up into like a little flat blob, or it might get absorbed depending upon the material. But in space, it becomes a full sphere. And as a full sphere, it becomes this giant blob that likes to stick to things. There's a famous video of astronaut Chris Hadfield getting a washcloth wet. He did this demonstration for students. He got a washcloth wet, and of course now the cloth itself has absorbed the water. And what he does is he grabs the ends of the washcloth and then squeezes it and twists it, trying to get the water out. Now normally on Earth, when you do that, where does the water go?
It drops down.
But in space, there is no down.
It stays there attached to the...
So what happens is the water never leaves. It's floating around the washcloth and then gloms, I use the term gloms over his hand and starts oozing around. And so you have this issue of, what do you do with this water? It doesn't want to go away. I have a whole chapter on space showers. And one of the big issues is space showers, because Skylab had one, the Mir had one, Cellular had one. I did some really in-depth research on that. The astronauts and cosmonauts enjoyed the moment of the shower, but it would take hours for them to clean the water off. And they had to worry about droplets of water flying around and touching electronics and wires.
Short circuits.
Fire. Bad idea. Yeah. So basically the showers were an afterthought. They were not very well designed. And so the idea was dropped for quite a while. But the European Space Agency and also this researcher from International Space University developed some new concepts using hydrophobic materials. So hydrophobic is a material that resists water. Oleophobic is material that resists oil. So in other words, if you splash water onto the surface, it would not stick. It would just drip right off. So there's hydrophobic and oleophobic materials used in industry for managing fluids. So we needed to design a shower for space that has this type of coating over the entire shower, so that when you take a shower, the water will be sucked into the vacuum at the vacuum drain at the bottom of the shower. My design basically has a air vent at the top, shower nozzle at the top as well, and then we have the flow of the air pushing everything down and a vacuum drain at the bottom. So you get kind of the resemblance of an earthbound shower a little bit, but you're kind of floating around in there. You also have straps so you can hold on to so you don't float too much. And then you take a normal shower. You use soap, you use shampoo, you do what you normally do for a shower. You can control the temperatures of both the airflow and the water flow, so it feels good. And then everything gets sucked down at the end. You can use a thing called a squeegee. They use that in car washes and places like that, and sometimes in your shower at home, where you basically squeeze the water, push the water off of the glass, so it doesn't stay on the glass. And if you have a coating, a hydrophobic coating of plastic on there that resists the water in the first place, it'll be much easier. And on top of that, how do you get the water off the human? That's the next part. We're not hydrophobic.
It sticks.
Our skin likes water a lot. But, too much is not a good thing. We need to get that water off. And that was one of the problems of the astronauts back in the day, was that the water would be all over them and they have to use a towel to get it off. So I did a little research in ancient history, and there's a concept called a strigil. Thanks to my wife, she brought this up. So there is an exfoliating tool called a strigil that they used in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. You remember the Roman baths or the Greek baths?
Yes.
They didn't have soap back then, so what they did use was olive oil. They would coat their entire body with olive oil, because that was a popular thing in Greece and Rome, was to coat their body, and then they would scrape the oil and the dirt off their skin at the same time to get it off the body. And so you can use a strigil, or a strigil-like device, to exfoliate, get the excess water and the dirt off of your skin. And since you have the vacuum going in the space shower anyways, it gets all sucked away. So you can use earthbound analogies for space. You just have to find the right application.
So you are a firm believer in the space tourism. We can argue about the term, but common people go into space. And you believe in that, you know it will happen, and the whole book idea is to talk about bits of comforts which will make normal people stay in space tolerable and pleasant and Earth-like.
Yes.
In small elements at least. And you believe, do you or do you not believe that we are talking about big numbers of common people traveling to space soon?
So let me give you a reality check. Okay, there are people talking about settling on Mars. You got people talking about settling on the moon. I don't believe that. Not in our lifetime. Not going to happen. We don't have the capability of doing that yet. We're barely lucky to even fly into space, much less build a space station. There are about a half dozen companies right now trying to design and build, and they have funding for private space stations. I've been at this game long enough that I'm just kind of in like, I'll believe it when I see it mode. You know, when people keep talking about, oh, I have this idea for a space station, and I'm going to get this much funding, and it takes all these years to build it. Until something flies, I'm not going to take it seriously. I don't care if your name is Jeff Bezos. Until his orbital reef actually flies, I'm not going to take it seriously. Because I've heard this story before over the last 20 years. It's like, okay, got these ideas, got these people want to build a space station. Bigelow Aerospace lasted the longest. They built prototypes, they flew prototypes, but there was no spaceship to get people to their space habitat. That's a shame. He had the right idea. And now a lot of his concepts are being applied by these new companies.
But we're getting close now with the Starships and Blue Origins.
Exactly.
The capacity, the launch capacity.
They're getting close, but until it's flying in production, are you going to get more people in space? You know, we talked about Deer Moon, and they canceled that project because the guy was tired of waiting and waiting and waiting for the launch to space to fly around the moon. Whatever. So until we have the production vehicles operational, the production space habitats operational, we're still kind of in a hurry up and wait mode. Hurry up and wait for the next generation to happen. And we have a lot of young people who are very excited about space now because thanks to SpaceX and Blue Origin and all those new guys, and that's great. We're all waiting for that one vehicle, that one system, and it shouldn't just be one, it should be multiple. We need to have multiple vehicles, or multiple space stations in orbit with different purposes. One could be a hotel, one could be a factory, one could be a research lab, one could be for exploration, whatever. It doesn't have to be a one-trick pony, we call it, a station that does everything. Let's spread it out. Have multiple businesses doing multiple things. We need a fuel depot, a gas station in space. We need somebody to start cleaning up all that space debris we got up there. We got a lot of dead spacecraft and other garbage in orbit. We need to deal with that now. By the way, I mentioned all this stuff in the book as well. So lots of other little things we need to work on. Primarily just building orbital infrastructure for humans to live in space. Let's get that figured out first before we even consider the moon and Mars and all that.
So the book, where people can buy this book, can they now?
So this is the paperback book will be available on Amazon on June 24th.
And again, let's give the name. Creature Comforts in Space by Samuel Coniglio.
Designing Enjoyment and Sustainability for Off-World Living by Samuel Coniglio, forward by a guy named Rick Tumlinson. Long story about him, won't get to that right now.
For those who don't see us, it's a blue, nice-looking cover.
Looks like a blueprint.
Yes.
It's a blueprint image. There's a hand trying to reach for a drinking cup in front of the space station cupola window that has all the windows and ports and all that.
So that when you're looking at Amazon, that's what you're looking for.
So the Ebook is available right now
At Amazon.
on Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm.
The paperback will be available on Amazon on June 24th. And after that, it'll be available through various independent booksellers online, on the internet, and all over the world. That's the nice thing about this, it's all over the world. And I will be making presentations about this book all over the place.
And I can say that I flipped through this book. I had held it in my hands. It's really nice looking. A lot of pictures, nice font.
Full color,
nice paper. And I have my personal copy, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And I strongly recommend to anyone who is interested in space tourism, space in general, to get a copy. It turned out to be much, much more interesting than I was expecting. Instead of one topic, which I touched at least 3 big ones.
Yep.
Delta Clipper, the history of the whole space tourism, and the book itself. All those small items which will make life comfortable on future big space stations. Samuel, thank you really, really very much for this. And I know that I pulled you away from your first time in Ireland.
It actually is my first time.
From first time in Ireland. So I spent half of a day, instead of unleashing you into the wonders of Dublin. Oh, actually, no, we have some rain now.
Oh, we have proper Dublin weather is back now. Oh, well.
But,
I'm going to take my shirt off now.
But thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And we will air this episode next week. And my guest name today was Samuel Coniglio.
Samuel Coniglio. The Italian version is Samuel Coniglio, but whatever works.
Whatever works. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.